What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have not seen Doctor Strange 2 yet, so we are uploading this video before the movie comes out so that we don't necessarily do spoilers. There will indefinitely be somebody in the comments section who will say, dude, you're spoiling the movie or something like that. If they do, feel free to laugh at them. Now, here's the thing. What this story does, there is a little bit of a kind of opening, right? As there are with stories like I'm Stephen Strange, and I do stuff that has to do with magic. But the thing about this is that where it really picks up is basically where things are popping off in New York. And of course, Doctor Strange ends up showing up because obviously it has to do with magic. And when this happens, he finds that some poor bastard had basically bonded himself to the 7 sons of Cenobus. Now, under any normal circumstance, this wouldn't really matter because the land of Cenobus, right, where the 7 sons reside in the Celestial Concordance, is actually kind of a cool place. The sun's never set, and it's like peaceful and it's harmonious, and they really have to do more with healing than anything else. But the reason why this guy's reacting the way that he is because something is going on in that location, which is basically wreaking havoc. And so all the pain and torment that's being experienced in that dimension is actually being felt by this guy. And that's how Stephen Strange knows something's off. Because if this was any normal circumstance, this would be the most chill dude ever, right? Like he would just be like, be well, guys. You know, he'd be like a hippie in the 60s, just high on hashish. That's what this guy would be. And so knowing that things are popping off after having bonded himself to that location, that's when Stephen Strange 1 dispels this connection between the two. And then following that, has a little bit of a meeting with the Strange Academy. Now, again, this is just Marvel kind of bringing in the Strange Academy, just kind of being like, by the way, guys, don't forget they exist, you know, and like they're still there and still doing their thing. But it's also him kind of teaching them a little bit about the nature of the Strange Academy, or at least Doctor Strange himself. Now, this is just kind of a rehash for people who never really read Doctor Strange before, because the title itself, The Death of Doctor Strange, and the fact that it's timed with the release of the movie, will hopefully bring in people who haven't necessarily read comics. The long and short of this is all Stephen Strange says is, look, there's a few things you got to know, right? As the Sorcerer Supreme, there is a hierarchy of magic users in the earthly dimension. That there are some individuals like Ileana Rasputin who are the quote-unquote Sorcerer Supreme of the realm of Limbo. And there are people like Clea, who is the Sorcerer Supreme of like the Dark Dimension, or something like that. He's like, but I am the Sorcerer Supreme of the earthly realm. So think of it in terms of like a political structure. Ileana Rasputin is the governor of Limbo, and Clea is the governor of the Dark Dimension, and I am basically above them all. And that's kind of how that works. And he also goes as far as to say the nature of him being Sorcerer Supreme is not a mantle he arbitrarily took. That instead, the mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme is actually a position that's recognized by the Vishanti themselves. And it's always been that way, or at least ever since the Vishanti have been introduced in Marvel Comics, but it's been that way for decades, right? That like the Ancient One became the Sorcerer Supreme because the Ancient One was chosen by the Vishanti to be the Sorcerer Supreme. And what that does is it grants Doctor Strange access to magical abilities that he wouldn't otherwise have. If Stephen Strange was not the Sorcerer Supreme, his magical powers would be limited to those of like Agatha Harkness or Ileana Rasputin or something along those lines, but he wouldn't be as powerful as he is. And that's what he says. He's like, but rest assured, while my job is to basically be the man on the wall and to protect the earth from different magical dimensions that exist out there and beings that are at all times trying to conquer us, the truth is that somewhere along the line, something will happen and I will die, right? And when that happens, a new Sorcerer Supreme will be chosen by the Vishanti and they'll be able to go forward from there. There's a whole process behind it. He's like, but that'll basically happen and we'll kind of go from there. But one of the things that Stephen Strange starts to realize is that the number of magical beings who are appearing on Earth is actually starting to pick up. At any given point in time, there are just any number of people from other dimensions who flee from those dimensions or whatever it is, kind of find their way through the cracks of the mystical spells that Doctor Strange has made and then arrive on Earth, usually to escape some, just terrible punishment at the hands of Dormammu or Satanish or Agamon or something like that. The thing about this is the number of people arriving here are picking up faster and faster. And that's when it's kind of like, okay, we got to figure out what's going on. Now, before Doctor Strange can really solve this mystery, what ends up happening is, of course, there's a knock at the door. And when he shows up to answer the door, someone, and we don't know who, absolutely ensnares him with mystical energy, bonds him to a wall, and then in doing so, removes his hands and then kills him. And that's the end of that. Now, the funny thing about this is that as soon as Doctor Strange dies, everybody who is in any form or fashion tied into magic feels it. You get Thor, you get Jericho Drum, even Reed Richards picks up on it. Now, Reed Richards doesn't really pick up on it because of the fact that he has to do with magic. It's because there's all these dimensional breaches that are taking place, because with the death of Doctor Strange also comes the removal of all the mystical enchantments that have been placed around the Earth to protect it from these dimensional breaches. And so what ends up happening, of course, is as soon as Stephen Strange dies, one of the first people to realize it happened was Baron Mordo. Because remember, Baron Mordo was always the guy trying to take out Stephen Strange. He had kind of like a vendetta against him, and it was always, I will be the one to kill Stephen Strange, and then I will be the one to replace him as Sorcerer Supreme, that kind of a thing. And so as a result of that, where initially Wong freaks out and attacks Stephen Strange, instead what actually goes on here is you end up having this kind of crazy situation where in effect a kind of mystical portal opens, and when that portal opens up, it's classic Doctor Strange who comes through, and he's kind of like, okay, what year is it? Like, what's going on here? Now, the reason why this classic version of Doctor Strange is here is for a few different reasons. One, because there was a safety measure that Doctor Strange had put in place. In his younger years, he had basically taken a portion of himself and hidden it away, so that if his physical form was killed under some circumstance, his classic version could come back, figure out who it was that killed him. Now, it doesn't mean he'd be here forever, and in fact, it's even established right off the bat, this is only really a temporary spell, but it does exist long enough to figure out who the murderer of Doctor Strange is. Now, one of the things that Marvel and Jed MacKay do here, which is kind of interesting, is they nerf the hell out of this guy. They reduce his power in the extreme. One thing to know, right, in the publication history, not really just the in-comic history, but in the publication history of Doctor Strange, when he was originally introduced in Marvel Comics, the guy could do anything he wanted to, right? Like, literally, there was a spell for everything. He's like, man, I wish I could travel back in time and, do something, invest in Google or something like that. Well, Google didn't really exist then. Like, invest in Colgate or Ford back when they were worth a damn and made vehicles that mattered. And so I have a spell for that, right? And he has a spell that makes him travel back in time, or if he needs to just arbitrarily overcome some magical being that's 4 times more powerful than he is, there's a magical spell that he can use to achieve that level of power. The guy had no limits. He was like Silver Age Superman, right? He got whatever power he needed at that particular point in time to come out victorious in the story. It got to the point where it was just outlandish. It was goofy. To be honest with you, man, like it was nonsense. The guy would just overcome the most ridiculous of odds. Like literally he broke free of the imprisoning bands of the living tribunal, second to God. And Doctor Strange is like, this ain't gonna work, and just breaks out of it. And it's like, how could I stop you from destroying the earth? And like, that's it. And it's just kind of like, all right. So the thing about this is this version of Doctor Strange is nowhere near as powerful as the old school classic version. It's basically just a younger version of Stephen Strange himself. Now, of course, with everything popping off the way that it is, you do have Zelma that contacted the Avengers. Of course, she is the assistant of Doctor Strange, and ultimately it's just kind of like, hey, things are popping off here or what have you. The funny thing here is that when Captain America contacts Stephen Strange and realizes it's not the Stephen Strange he knows, Captain America kind of takes it in stride, and he was like, you know what, I'll just chalk it up to the magical stuff that you do, man. I don't try to understand it, Stephen. I don't try to understand the magical things that you do. I just know that you're capable of doing some stuff, and this is one of those times when we need you to do some stuff. So do your stuff and help us overcome whatever this threat is. Now, the cool thing about this, and this is one of the things that I really find interesting, really find fascinating about this, is that what you have is basically the arrival of Clea. Now, Clea is a long-standing character in the Doctor Strange mythos. Originally, she was just the girl from the Dark Dimension, and then she ended up becoming the girlfriend of Stephen Strange, and then eventually married him, and then essentially things went exactly the way you would expect them to with a narcissist like Stephen Strange, and things went south. But she was the ruler of the Dark Dimension at one point in time. The point that I'm making here is, depending on what era you're reading in Marvel Comics, Clea was broken. Like back in the day, she was OP. It was nuts. You talk to anybody who's read like old school Doctor Strange stories, and they'll say, yeah, man, like Clea was a hoss way back in the day. But this basically takes place at a point when essentially Stephen Strange he's only met Clea as the girl from the Dark Dimension. She doesn't become his girlfriend or his wife yet. And so their relationship is really more of like Stephen's passing interest in her, but really nothing more than that. And as soon as that becomes the case, that's when she realizes you're not Stephen Strange, at least the Stephen Strange that I know. But the other part of this, and the reason why she's here, is because she's basically fleeing. And she says that. She's like, I'm getting away as fast as I can. And they're like, what are you talking about? And she's like, basically like the mothers, right? The 3 mothers, the Weir, the Crown, and the Crawling. And ultimately she's like, these beings have the ability to follow people's scents, right? Magical beings, and track them down no matter where they go. And that's the thing. Once the 3 mothers manifest, of course, like everybody shows up, right? You end up having like Baron Mordo, who was already there, and he was like, no, I gotta go. And basically bails alongside his assistant Caecilius. And then you've got the Avengers who show up. Now, the funny thing about this is that when you're dealing with magical beings, mystical beings in Marvel Comics, It's a whole different set of rules. It's not like the Red Skull has teamed up with Hydra yet again, and they're going to attack some place in America and only the Avengers can save them. It's not like that, right? This is one of those things where like you're dealing with a whole different set of events. People with magical abilities that literally augment any existing powers they have, or will simply just give them a whole new set of powers. And that's why when the three mothers show up here and all the Avengers start facing off against them, they get annihilated, right? They get absolutely just crushed with a quickness. I mean, Thor, the whole 9 yards. These guys get absolutely wrecked. And it's not even close, because at that point, the three sisters, I guess apparently they showed up here just for the purpose of attacking the Avengers and then they leave. They didn't really do anything. And in fact, they're like, you know what, we'll come and grab Clea at some future point in time. But it's also because one part of them knows Stephen Strange as the Sorcerer Supreme is not someone you just trifle with. Right? Like you gotta kind of prepare yourself for that little bit of a battle. And so one of the things that goes on, and depending on who you talk to, they may or may not necessarily agree with this, that when it comes to Stephen Strange, one of the things that's established is that when his younger self, again, with the surgeon background, does the autopsy essentially on his older self alongside Jane Foster, that he says that what had happened here is magic was used to bind his older self in place. And then his hands were taken and his soul was taken. And he says the reason why this matters is because it was a magical ritual, that whoever it is that has my hands out there, it basically also has my soul with it. If my soul does not pass on to the afterlife, basically travel back into the magical ether, then a new Sorcerer Supreme cannot be chosen. And because a new Sorcerer Supreme cannot be chosen, there can be no Sorcerer Supreme here. Now, here's the reason why I say people may or may not agree with that. This directly flies in the face of the story that basically dealt with Stephen Strange losing his title of Sorcerer Supreme. That if all of this holds true, and that a person is the Sorcerer Supreme because they're chosen by the Vishanti, there was a story, which is actually how Brother Voodoo ended up becoming kind of a mainstay character in the Doctor Strange mythos. There was a story where the Vishanti enlisted Stephen Strange for help with a conflict that they were going against, and Stephen Strange said no. So they stripped him of the mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme, along with 80% of his magic, which was basically provided by the Vishanti. In doing so, they passed the mantle to Brother Voodoo, to Jericho Drum, and he ended up becoming Dr. Voodoo and became the new Sorcerer Supreme. When that happened, of course, Stephen Strange was just kind of there for a while. Eventually, Stephen Strange got the title back and went back to being Sorcerer Supreme. But this story flies in the face of that. And in fact, if that story is an absolute, which it is one of the most significant stories in the Doctor Strange mythos, then what's happening here makes no sense. That it wouldn't work this way. The Vishanti would just kind of be like, okay, well, we'll just pick a new Sorcerer Supreme. And like, that would be it. Now, the other big concern here is that he, this classic version of Strange, the younger Strange, says that his ability to use magical energy the way that he does is inexorably tied to his hands. Whoever it is that's in possession of his hands likely literally attached his hands to themselves. And now they can wield all the power that's available to him, using him as the Sorcerer Supreme, right? Literally using his soul to become the Sorcerer Supreme. And so as a result of that, it's basically like somebody put on, it's pretending to be Stephen Strange, tapping into his power, and basically the Vishanti and those guys out there wouldn't know the difference, because as far as they're aware, the soul of Stephen Strange is still on Earth and still doing its thing. And that's basically it. And so as a result of that, he's basically like, until we find my soul and find my hands, the Earth may very well be doomed. Like, I cannot do anything that the Sorcerer Supreme can do. None of the magical spells that I cast can keep this place safe. None of that can go on. Now, the other thing about this is that all these different magical beings that exist out there, right? Umar, who's the sister of Dormammu and all that kind of stuff, all those magical warlords have actually fled to Earth. And the reason why is because Earth itself has repelled some pretty heavy hitters. Galactus, Dormammu, all those different guys, right? Satanish, and even the Living Tribunal to a degree, although it was really more the Tribunal walking away. But the thing about this is they all basically take refuge there because of how powerful the people on Earth are. And the idea is they can all basically keep those individuals protected from whoever the three sisters are, along with what is in effect the Peregrine Child. Because you get this really, really cool explanation and this really, really cool discussion here, where you basically end up learning that what had happened is that somewhere along the line, and we don't really know the details of how it took place, but somewhere along the line, the Peregrine Child emerged. And that is simply just referred to, and really even the three mothers are referred to as beings from the outer planes. Again, no origin is given here. We don't know where they came from. We don't know why they do what they do. All we know is that the Peregrine Child is literally a consumer of magic. So imagine the Peregrine Child basically being the magical version of Galactus, essentially. That with the three mothers, they just travel around from one location to the next, right? From like one magical realm to the next. And in turn, just consume various people who are out there, various magical beings, the magical energy that imbues them and all that kind of stuff. And like, that's it. That's all they do. again, there's no real motivation for why. And even the story of the three mothers is a little bit questionable here, because Clea goes as far as to say, like, we don't necessarily know the origin of the three mothers, but I would go as far as to say that maybe something had popped off in their realm, but their story is one of tragedy, right? And they were probably ensnared into the service of the Peregrine child. But whatever it is, that's the main bad guy in the story right now. And so because of that, what ends up happening is Clea basically casts a spell that involves something whose name I can't pronounce. And basically it travels around the world for the purpose of finding the hands of Doctor Strange, which they ultimately locate being in the castle of Baron Mordo. So right off the bat, it's just kind of like, okay, it makes sense that Baron Mordo would do that. The guy's always been a dick, right? He's always been the guy who's been gunning for Stephen Strange, always trying to kill him, all that kind of stuff. So what we end up getting are these kind of dual circumstances happening at the same time. On one circumstance, you essentially get the three mothers that basically show up to the warlord of Dagoth, right? The one who basically exists out in Kalamesh, right? That's literally where his kingdom is just kind of residing right now, essentially 7 miles off the coast of Cornwall, England. And then at the same time, you have Stephen Strange and you have those guys who basically show up to the castle of Baron Mordo. And so as these two things happen simultaneously, the three mothers take out Dagoth quite easily, right? They're literally able to overcome him pretty easily and then basically drag him off to the Peregrine child where he'll ultimately be consumed. And then at the same time, Stephen Strange finally ends up confronting Baron Mordo and is like, you know what? I should have killed you a long time ago, right? Like, well, at least my younger self, I should have killed you shortly after it was revealed that you were basically a traitor, you know, surrounded, or at least in the realm of the Ancient One, right? I should have killed you, man. That's basically what I should have done, was taken you out. And of course, Baron Mordo basically pops up, and while he does have the Eye of Agamotto, and he does have the Cloak of Levitation, ultimately, it's one of those things where you end up having him just kind of come out and say, look, what makes you think that if I were to kill you, that I would lie about it, right? Like, you're Stephen Strange. You're literally my mortal enemy. It would be a source of pride to destroy you. And the reality here, but it was my mistake earlier, the ghost thing wasn't looking for the hands, it was looking for the Eye of Agamotto. I don't know why I kept thinking it was looking for his hands. I've just been stuck on somebody else wearing Doctor Strange's hands because it's weird to me, right? It's just kind of strange to me. It's cool, but it's kind of strange. But regardless, of course, you know, he's kind of like, I would not lie about killing you, Stephen Strange. I hate your guts. Like, I absolutely hate your guts. And I want to replace you, right? I want to end up taking your place. So if anything, I would celebrate the fact that I killed you. Everybody in the magical world would know that I killed you because it would elevate my stature, right? If people knew that I was the one who took you out, people would be like, damn, this guy's powerful. Okay, so we won't all bend the knee to Baron Mordo per se, but we will recognize that you're very, very powerful, right? Which is kind of enough for him because the guy's got like a massive ego. But when that happens, Stephen Strange is kind of like, you know what, you make a good point. You never would have lied about it. You wouldn't hide it, right? You would make it incredibly evident to everybody that this is what you've done. And so what ends up happening here is Stephen Strange basically travels to the domain of Umar, right, out in Antarctica, and basically brings all these different magical beings together and really just kind of reveals everything that he had figured out. And so what he says here is, if all you were really looking to do was flee the three mothers and the Peregrine child, you would have just showed up here by yourself. You would have just shown up here on your own, and that would have been it. Probably asking for some kind of a safe harbor in the ways that only you guys can, by basically being jerks and being rude and so on and so forth. But you brought your entire kingdoms with you. And in order to do that, the barrier created by Stephen Strange had to be taken down. But Umar and Tiburo and so on, you guys couldn't simply just show up here and then basically just consume this realm, or at least, you know, destroy me. You couldn't do that. Otherwise, you would risk the wrath of the Vishanti and any number of people that exist out there, all of whom are magic wielders. You would have seen yourselves killed. What you needed was a pawn. You needed a person you can manipulate, a person that you could control that would do the deed for you. And then in doing that, you would be able to enter into this realm. So quite literally, you had me killed because you were trying to get away from your dimensions and the Peregrine child and the three mothers, so you could basically survive. Not the worst motivation, but you're still dicks for doing it. And so ultimately, he's like, I have figured out exactly who the man was, or who the person was that had basically taken me out, the one who had killed me. He says, I was told that I exiled a man into the purple dimension, a man who served a dire enemy of mine. The exile to a land of cruelty and suffering was one thing, but how much more keenly must it have hurt when this man's master, to whom he had given his unwavering loyalty, his blood and tears and very soul, made no effort to save him. Would he not wish to hurt his master the way he had been hurt, the way he had been discarded like a broken tool of no consequence? Isn't that right, Caecilius? And it turns out Caecilius is the one who had actually killed Stephen Strange, and that's why he's been wearing gloves this whole time is to basically keep his hands hidden, right? So nobody would know that he has the hands of Stephen Strange, because inevitably what would happen is presumably someone, whether it was Caecilius or whoever, would overcome the three sisters and the Peregrine Child, and that would set the stage for Caecilius to likely destroy Baron Mordo, and then in doing so, replace him. And then Caecilius would become the Sorcerer Supreme. But of course, in the midst of all this, the three mothers and the Peregrine Child end up showing up here. I feel like I keep saying three sisters, but like the three mothers and the Peregrine Child show up here, and basically a giant battle ends up unfolding here. Now, the price that's paid by Caecilius for his actions, and what classic Stephen Strange does is like, look, I am a practitioner of the mystic arts, and ultimately, you're using my hands, which I can basically do anything I want with. And he was like, I'm not going to simply just let you get away with my murder. Instead, what he ends up doing is actually transmogrifying Caecilius to the point where Caecilius basically ceases to exist. And in his place is basically a resurrected Stephen Strange by classic Strange using his own hands to resurrect his present self. So basically, the new Stephen Strange returns, or at least the modern Stephen Strange ends up returning. Now, it is a temporary thing. It is not going to last forever, right? In effect, it's just kind of a basic spell that's designed to bring him back because there is a plan that has to be unfolded here. Right at the moment, you've got the X-Men doing what they can and the Avengers doing what they can to basically hold off the three mothers and the Peregrine Child, but they're not going to last forever. And so ultimately, it's one of those things where classic Strange tells modern Strange, you have to make sure you stick to the plan, right? Do not go off course. Do not deviate. We all know our parts. It's the only way that we can save the earthly realm and basically defeat the three mothers and the Peregrine Child, right? It's the only way we can pull all this off. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of this battle, that basically Doctor Strange, Clea, Tibero, Ileana Rasputin, and Agamon all basically end up banding together and forming a magical pentagram. And in doing that, what it does is it unites all their powers together. It links all of their powers. In effect, it's 5 Sorcerer Supremes all operating together. Now keep in mind, Stephen Strange is the most powerful of the Sorcerer Supremes, but they are all still wildly powerful magical beings in and of themselves. But more so than that, by linking their powers, they've become greater than the sum of their parts. And so in doing so, they quite literally end up basically blasting the three mothers. Now, there is a point where the Peregrine Child basically ends up instilling some of its power inside of them. And the reason why this works is because remember, the Peregrine Child has basically been consuming magic for eons. So it has a lot more magical energy at its disposal than the forces of Stephen Strange or any of those guys. And so in that moment, what ends up happening is classic Strange basically offers itself as a distraction and races to the Peregrine Child and is actually consumed by it. Now, where the Peregrine Child looks at this from the perspective of like, it's consumed Stephen Strange and his magical energies, that what's actually going on here is it was only the astral form of classic Strange. What it does is it allows him to enter into the bodily form of the Peregrine Child where all this magical energy resides. And much like a powder keg, all it takes is some kind of an explosion, right? Some kind of something to ignite it. And that's exactly what he does. He literally ignites all this magical energy. And in doing so, it basically explodes or destroys the Peregrine Child. And of course, the three mothers end up going with it. But in effect, the day's saved. I mean, it wraps up pretty quickly. It wraps up pretty fast. It is cool to see, right? But like, they're all basically incinerated. The day is saved and that's it. But following that, Stephen Strange, of course, has a bit of a meeting. The modern day Strange has a bit of a meeting with Clea where he basically confesses how much he loves her, right? And the fact that he was a fool for just like walking away or letting her leave or anything along those lines, right? For letting their relationship come to an end. But he also says like, I can't stay here, right? Like I cannot stay in this place. Like this is a temporary form for me to use. After that, like there will be no more Sorcerer Supreme on Earth. And so in effect, what ends up happening is Stephen Strange's physical form dies, but his soul is able to travel back to the ether. And what Marvel has kind of established here is that with Clea being left with the Eye of Agamotto and the Cloak of Levitation, and Stephen Strange's soul being sent back into the ether, and the Vishanti being able to choose a new Sorcerer Supreme, that in effect, Clea ends up becoming the new Sorcerer Supreme. Whether or not it's good or not, I have no idea. I haven't read it yet. I don't even know if it's out yet. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching. The story was okay, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.